I knew something was wrong the moment I saw sunlight where sunlight wasn't supposed to be. Out in western Oklahoma, when you've spent nearly 20 years walking the same property every morning, you notice little things. You notice when a gate hangs differently after a storm. You notice when cattle gather somewhere unusual. And you definitely notice when a brand new fence suddenly appears where no fence has any business being. That morning started like hundreds before it. I poured myself a cup of coffee, climbed onto my old ATV, and headed toward the north side of my property to check fence posts after a nasty windstorm rolled through the night before. My dog Tucker trotted alongside for a while before getting distracted by something in the grass. Nothing felt unusual at first. Then I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There, stretching across the edge of my pasture, stood about 200 feet of freshly installed cedar fencing. Tall, expensive, perfectly straight. The kind of decorative fence people build when they care more about appearances than cattle. I stopped the ATV and just stared, because I knew exactly where my property line was. My grandfather bought that land back in the 70s. My father worked it before me. I'd repaired that fence line so many times over the years, I could probably walk it blindfolded. And that new fence wasn't on the boundary. Not even close. It sat several feet inside my property. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I should probably explain who lived next door. About a year earlier, the old Carter place had been sold. For decades, it belonged to a retired mechanic named Walt Carter. Good man. Kvietman. The kind of neighbor who'd wave from half a mile away and somehow make you feel like you just had a conversation. When Walt passed away, his daughters sold the property to a couple from Dallas named Brent and Vanessa Caldwell. The Caldwells arrived with money. A lot of money. You could tell immediately. Within weeks, the old farmhouse was demolished. Then came architects, contractors, landscapers, designers, survey crews, and enough construction vehicles to clog every road in the county. For almost 9 months, the sound of nail guns and concrete mixers echoed across the pasture. When they finally finished, the house looked like something from a luxury real estate magazine. Floor-to-ceiling glass, stone imported from somewhere expensive, an infinity pool, outdoor fireplaces, a guest house bigger than most homes in town. The place wasn't ugly exactly. It just looked completely out of place, like somebody had dropped Beverly Hills into cattle country. At first, though, I genuinely tried to be welcoming. When Brent got his fancy utility vehicle stuck in a muddy drainage ditch, I pulled him out with my tractor. When they asked where to buy feed for their horses, I gave them directions. When coyotes started showing up near their property, I even warned them to keep their tiny designer dogs indoors at night. They always smiled, always thanked me, always acted polite. But over time, little things started piling up. Their guests would cut across my pasture instead of using their driveway. Their dogs chased cattle. Their grandkids treated my fields like a private playground for their ATVs. Every time I brought something up, I got the same response. A smile, a nod, and absolutely nothing changed. The thing about disrespect is that it rarely arrives all at once. It shows up in tiny pieces. A shortcut here, an excuse there, a boundary crossed, so casually you almost convince yourself it wasn't intentional. Looking back now, I think the fence was simply the moment I finally stopped making excuses for them. That evening, I pulled my survey documents from a filing cabinet in the house. I spread everything across the kitchen table. Then I measured, checked, measured again, then checked a third time. I kept hoping I'd made a mistake. Honestly, I wanted to be wrong, because mistakes are easy. Mistakes can be fixed. What I eventually realized was much worse. The fence was exactly where I thought it was, and somebody had knowingly built it there. I rolled up the survey papers, set them beside the door, and sat quietly for a while watching the sunset through my kitchen window. Across the pasture, the lights from the Caldwell estate began glowing one by one. The pool lights, the landscape lighting, the decorative lanterns lining their stone pathways. It looked impressive. I'll give them that. But as I sat there staring at those lights, one thought kept running through my mind. Some people spend millions building the house of their dreams, then somehow convince themselves they own everything around it too. The next afternoon, I decided to walk over and have a conversation. A calm conversation. A reasonable conversation. The kind neighbors are supposed to have before things get ugly. At least that was the plan. What happened when Vanessa Caldwell opened that front door changed everything. Vanessa Caldwell answered the door wearing tennis clothes that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. She had one of those practice smiles people develop after spending years around country clubs and charity galas. The kind that looks friendly until you realize there's absolutely no warmth behind it. "Can I help you?" she asked. I held up the survey papers. "Actually, yes. I think your contractors made a mistake when they installed that new fence." The smile faded immediately. Not completely. Just enough. I explained what I'd found. I showed her the survey. I pointed out the markers and measurements. I kept my voice calm because I honestly believed we were dealing with a misunderstanding. She barely glanced at the paperwork. "We hired professionals," she said. "I'm sure you did. They know what they're doing." I nodded. "Apparently not, because the fence is sitting on my property." That was when she crossed her arms and gave me a look I'd come to recognize over the past year. It wasn't anger. It was dismissal. The kind of expression people wear when they've already decided you're wrong before hearing what you have to say. Then she said something I still remember word for word. "Well, it's not like you were using that strip anyway." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. I looked down at the survey, then back at her. "I'm sorry. The land," she said. "It's just sitting there. Just sitting there." As if ownership suddenly depended on whether someone found a particular piece of property visually useful. As if decades of legal boundaries could be erased because she preferred the view from her patio. Right then something clicked in my head. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This was entitlement. I rolled up the survey papers and smiled. "All right." She seemed surprised. That's it. Then I tipped my hat and walked away. The funny thing about calm responses is they make arrogant people uncomfortable. They expect an argument. They expect emotion. What they don't expect is silence. And what Vanessa didn't know was that the moment I walked back to my truck, I'd already stopped thinking like a neighbor and started thinking like a landowner. The following morning, I drove into Red Hollow, the nearest county seat. The courthouse wasn't much to look at. Old brick building, cracked sidewalks, American flag out front flapping in the wind. Inside, everything smelled like paper, dust, and 40 years of government coffee. I filed a formal encroachment complaint. No drama. No threats. Just paperwork. The woman behind the desk looked over my documents and nodded. "We'll send someone out." 3 days later, a county inspector arrived. He measured, photographed, checked records, verified survey markers. By the end of the afternoon, his findings matched mine exactly. The Caldwell fence sat nearly 9 feet inside my property boundary. Official notices were issued. They had 30 days to remove the structure. Simple. At least it should have been. Most reasonable people would have accepted the mistake and fixed it. The Caldwells were not most reasonable people. About a week later, I was repairing a gate near my barn when a black luxury SUV rolled down my driveway. Brent Caldwell stepped out. Perfect jeans, designer boots that had probably never touched actual mud, expensive sunglasses, the whole package. He walked toward me with the confidence of a man who rarely heard the word no. "Mr. Walker," he said. "My name's Mason." Right, Mason. The fact he got my name wrong somehow irritated me more than the fence. He leaned against the fence post beside me. "We need to discuss this situation." I nodded. "Seems pretty straightforward." He forced a laugh. "Surely we can find a practical solution." There it was. Practical solution. I've noticed wealthy people love that phrase. Usually what they mean is how much money would make you stop being inconvenient. "The practical solution," I said, "is moving the fence." His smile disappeared. You're creating a lot of unnecessary hostility over in used pasture." And used. There was that word again. As though they had all agreed among themselves that land only mattered if it benefited them. I looked out across the field. The grass swayed in the breeze. My cattle grazed near the creek. The same land my family had cared for long before the Caldwells ever discovered this county existed. Then I looked back at him. The fence moves. His jaw tightened. The conversation ended shortly afterward, and as I watched him drive away, I finally accepted something important. They weren't going to fix this voluntarily, so I started making plans. Now, before anybody gets the wrong idea, I didn't plan anything illegal. Actually, the reason this story ended the way it did is because I became obsessive about doing everything legally. I called my attorney. Then I called him again. Then probably 3 more times after that. Every idea I had got run through legal review. Every permit requirement got checked. Every setback regulation got verified. Because once you understand the rules better than the person trying to push you around, something interesting happens. You stop reacting. You start positioning. About 2 weeks later, delivery trucks began arriving at my property. Steel beams, lumber, roofing materials, concrete forms. The first truck hadn't even finished unloading before I noticed movement next door. The Caldwells were watching. Of course they were. For 3 straight days, construction materials continued arriving. Workers marked measurements. Equipment moved into place. Foundations were prepared. The curiosity next door slowly transformed into concern. Then concern became panic. Finally, on the 4th afternoon, Vanessa marched across the field toward me. Large sunglasses, expensive workout outfit, expression somewhere between outrage and disbelief. She stopped about 10 feet away. What exactly are you building? I took a sip of iced tea before answering. A barn. The silence afterward was beautiful. A genuine moment of pure horror. A barn. That's right. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious. She looked toward the construction stakes, then back at me, then back at the stakes, because she had finally realized where the structure was going. Right along the property line. Perfectly legal, perfectly permitted, and positioned in a way that would change everything. What kind of barn? She asked. I smiled. A working cattle barn. I'll never forget the look on her face. It was the exact moment she understood that the little strip of land they tried to take was about to become the most expensive mistake of their lives. And the best part? Construction hadn't even started yet. Construction started the following Monday. And from that moment forward, the mood along our stretch of county road changed completely. Every morning, trucks rolled in before sunrise. Steel posts were set. Concrete was poured. Crews worked their way down the property line with the kind of efficiency that comes from people who know exactly what they're doing. And every single day, I noticed the Caldwells watching. Sometimes from their back patio. Sometimes through those giant glass windows. Sometimes standing near their pool, pretending not to stare. The truth was, they already knew what was coming. What they didn't know was how thoroughly I prepared. The county permits were approved. The inspections were scheduled. The setbacks exceeded requirements. Every measurement had been verified multiple times. There wasn't a single inch of that project they could challenge. 3 weeks later, the barn was finished. And honestly, it was beautiful. Not fancy. Not luxurious. Not designed for magazine covers. Just honest. Steel roof. Heavy timber framing. Feed storage. Equipment space. Everything a working ranch needed. Most importantly, it sat entirely on my property, running parallel to the boundary line exactly where county regulations allowed. The very next morning, I moved cattle into it. Now, if you've never lived around livestock, let me explain something. Real ranches aren't decorative. They're not resorts. They have sounds. They have smells. They have dust. That's not a flaw. That's reality. The Caldwells had spent millions trying to create their perfect country dream. But somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten an important detail. The countryside already existed before they arrived. I was feeding cattle around sunrise when I saw Vanessa step onto her patio carrying a coffee mug. She took one sip, then stopped. A breeze drifted across the pasture. You could almost see the moment reality reached her. She slowly lowered the mug, turned toward the barn, and just stood there. I nearly laughed into my coffee. 2 days later, both Caldwells came storming across the property together. No smiles, no politic conversation, no carefully managed social masks. Just anger. Pure anger. Brent pointed toward the barn. You built that specifically to punish us. I set down a feed bucket and looked at him. No, don't insult my intelligence. It's a barn. You know exactly what you're doing. I nodded. Running a ranch. Vanessa threw her hands in the air. That structure destroyed our view. I shrugged. You mean the view across my property? Neither of them liked that answer. Brent stepped closer. Our property value has been affected. Maybe. This is harassment. No. Irregulia comely. The fence was harassment. This is agriculture. That conversation lasted another 10 minutes. Threats were made. Lawsuits were mentioned. Words like nuisance and retaliation got thrown around. The entire time, I remained calm because I'd already had every one of those discussions with my attorney. And my attorney had the same response every time. Let them try. The months that followed became expensive for the Caldwells. Not because of me, because of themselves. The county deadline expired. The fence remained. Then the fines began. Daily fines. Not catastrophic at first, but they added up. Every single day, every single week, every single month. Eventually, the county court got involved. By then, the evidence was overwhelming. Survey records, inspection reports, photographs, violation notices. Everything pointed in one direction. The fence had to go. The judge ordered complete removal. I still remember hearing the decision. Not because I felt victorious, but because I felt relieved. There was something satisfying about watching the system work exactly the way it was supposed to. Then came the part nobody saw coming. Removing the fence turned out to be far more complicated than installing it. Before my barn existed, contractors could have simply brought equipment in from my side and removed everything quickly. Now, that option was gone. The work had to be done entirely from the Caldwell property. Carefully, slowly, painfully. Workers spent days dismantling sections by hand. Each cedar panel had to be removed individually. Posts had to be extracted one at a time. Crews maneuvered around landscaping, irrigation systems, decorative stonework, outdoor lighting, and all the expensive features the Caldwells had invested so heavily in. Every morning, I'd sit outside with coffee and watch. Not gloating, at least not openly. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying. One morning, a worker looked over at me while carrying a fence panel. He shook his head and laughed. I laughed too. No words needed. We both understood. The entire mess had been avoidable. By late summer, the fence was gone. The property line was restored. The county closed the case. And something interesting happened afterward. The party stopped. The music disappeared. The backyard sat empty more often than not. The pool lights stayed off. The Caldwells seemed smaller somehow. Quieter. Less certain. Word eventually spread through town that they were considering selling. I don't know whether that was true. Small towns create rumors the way clouds create rain. But I do know this. The last time I saw Brent Caldwell, he looked exhausted. He climbed into his SUV one afternoon while I was feeding cattle near the barn. For a second, I thought he might say something. Wave maybe, or finally acknowledge everything that had happened. Instead, he looked away and drove off. And that was that. Now, when people hear this story, they usually ask the same question. Was it worth it? My answer surprises some folks. Yes, absolutely. But not because I got revenge. Not because they lost. And not because I won. It was worth it because boundaries matter. The fence was never really about 9 feet of land. It was about what those 9 feet represented. Respect, ownership, accountability. The moment somebody starts treating your boundaries like suggestions, they're testing something much bigger than property lines. They're testing whether you'll defend yourself at all. And here's the lesson I took away from the whole experience. Kindness is valuable. Patience is valuable. Being a good neighbor is valuable. But none of those things mean surrender. You can be respectful without being weak. You can be reasonable without being passive. And sometimes the most effective response isn't anger. It's preparation. Looking back, I still walk past that barn every morning. The steel roof catches the sunrise. The cattle wander in and out. Life goes on. Most days I barely think about the Caldwells anymore. But every once in a while I'll stand there with a cup of coffee and remember how a simple fence turned into the most expensive lesson in respect anyone on this road ever learned. Now here's the question I've argued about with friends ever since. Did I go too far? Some people say building the barn, where I did, was completely justified. Others say it was legal, but definitely petty. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. So I want to hear what you think. If your neighbor knowingly built on your property and refused to fix it, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have accepted a compromise? Would you have fought harder? Or would you have come up with something even more creative? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because out here, property line disputes have a funny way of dividing people almost as much as they divide land.